It's the Tony Toppings Show on Planet X.
Planet X. The truth is on air. This is Planet X. Planet X.
Broadcasting to you from the studios of Planet X, this is the Tony Toppings Show.
Does not exist. This is Planet X. Planet X. Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email, find us on Facebook.
I was going to the lamb and flag, but I'm not. It's the Tony Toppings Show. A very special guest on the programme, which is gorgeous George Galloway, who's come on to chat about Syria. I'm interested to ask him a few questions, and I'm very interested on his comments regarding some of the projects he's working on. Without further ado, Mr. George Galloway, good evening.
Good evening to you. A pleasure to be on with you, Tony.
Thank you very much, matey. From the days of TalkSport, you were interviewing me about UFOs, and now I'm interviewing you. And,
yes. It's a funny old world, as Mrs. Thatcher said.
It is a funny old world, isn't it? And the question I want to ask you, George, is somebody like me who's a member of the public, who's looking at all this, is asking the question, why is there a money for a war with Syria, but there isn't the money for basic welfare provisions, jobs, schools, etc.
That's right. Well, we've never got money for the public services we need, but we've always got money to go around the world setting fire to other people's countries. We don't have money to keep our old pensioners warm in the winter time, but we can set fire to Iraq and Afghanistan, play a role in the setting fire to Palestine and Lebanon. And now we see the British government trying to persuade other governments in the world to do what the British Parliament would not allow them to do, which was join a new war against Syria. And it beggars belief, actually, that a country which is almost bankrupt can have unlimited funds for death and destruction. And at this very moment, this evening in London, there are protesters blocking the roads in East London to try to stop people going to a weapons fair, an arms bazaar, where Britain is inviting all the grisly dictators from around the world to come and buy weapons off us. And on the front page of the Mail on Sunday today, we saw the most remarkable splash headline, that the chemical weapons we say that the government of Syria used a few weeks ago on the outskirts of Damascus were sold to them by British companies with the connivance and with the license given by the very British government that now wants us to go to war. You really couldn't make it up, Tony.
You couldn't, mate. As a member of the public, seeing David Cameron stand up there and talk about the disturbance he had regarding the killing of innocent children, men and women. Surely Mr. Cameron, George, is a great humanitarian. He has this strong moral compass to do the right thing within the international community. Am I being duped there?
Well, he invited us in his speech in Parliament to take a look at the videos of the suffering and death of 338 people, he said, in Iraq. The French say it was 238. The Americans say it was 1,488. So their intelligence doesn't seem to be able to tally. But of course, there are many videos from Syria out there in the public arena on YouTube. One of which I posted on my Facebook page, George Galloway MP, this very evening. I warn you, you'd have to have a strong stomach to watch it. But it was yet another of literally thousands of videos put up by Al-Qaeda elements in the civil war in Syria, supported by us armed by us, financed by us, sawing off a man's head and holding it up to the camera whilst chanting the name of God and other religious incantations. It beggars belief that this country is being asked to join a war on the side of Al-Qaeda. Yes, the same Al-Qaeda which 12 years ago, almost to the day, flew aeroplanes into the Twin Towers, murdered thousands of Americans. We all saw the buildings tumbling down. We saw the people jumping out of the windows. We saw the horror of it all. But now, 12 years later, they're our allies. Well, no thank you. I don't want to be allies of Al-Qaeda, and I don't think the majority of British people do either.
Yeah, indeed, George. And you talk about do you think there is a confusion in mainstream society regarding people who worship peaceful Islam, the peaceful Islamic faith, compared to the people who are in Al-Qaeda? Do you see this ignorance in our society quite often?
Well, of course, the person who allegedly, I say allegedly, though we saw him do it, tried to cut off the head of a British young drummer boy in the streets of Woolwich in South London just a few months ago. If he had done that in Syria, William Hague would have given him money and would have given him the weapons with which to do it. We are encouraging in Syria the very elements we are terrorized by here at home, who blew themselves up, for example, on 7/7/2005, on the London Underground and on a London bus. We are encouraging the demons, the serpents of extremism on the immoral principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. Well, your enemy's enemy isn't always your friend. Sometimes your enemy's enemy is worse than your enemy. And we didn't learn the lesson of Afghanistan in the 1980s, when we brought forth the monster of bin Ladenism, of the Taliban, and the kind of people that we're now fighting in Afghanistan. And some of our young men, hundreds of them, in fact, have come home dead in boxes. And thousands of our young men have been wounded and maimed, fighting the very people that we armed, financed, and conjured forth in the first place.
So really what we're saying is William Hague, the Foreign Secretary, is fully aware of what he's doing, is fully aware of the rank hypocrisy of this action. And how do you view that as an MP within Westminster when you meet these individuals as to the agenda at play? Why are you doing this?
I asked the Prime Minister, you can look it up on YouTube. I asked the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Question Time about 5 months ago if he would adumbrate for the House the main differences, just the main ones, between the Al-Qaeda we were fighting in Mali and the Al-Qaeda we were supporting in Syria. Answer, he had none. I asked him, these hand-chopping, throat-cutting, head-chopping people that are our allies in Syria are exactly the same people that we are fighting in Mali, as we and the French set out to do, that we are fighting in Afghanistan, the very same kind of people. Extremists of the most bloodthirsty, bestial variety are our allies in Syria and our enemies elsewhere. No one could make sense of such a policy. It is close to a definition of insanity.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And George, what intrigues me the most about you is I've been an admirer of your work, very strong in what you believe in. Can you indulge my imagination for a minute? You are, let us imagine, it's number 10 Downing Street. You are the Prime Minister, you're Prime Minister George Galloway, the press are outside, you've got the Syria situation to deal with, you've got the Assad regime to deal with. If you're the Prime Minister, what would you do, Prime Minister Galloway, with this situation? How would you handle it?
It's quite simple. We have to stop doing what we're doing right now. Just this week, David Cameron, in this country of ours, which has millions of people unemployed, which has laid off hundreds of thousands of public servants, which is presiding over a more divided society than we have ever had, gave yet another £57 million to the Syrian rebels. This brings to hundreds of millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money that has been given to the Syrian rebels in the last 2 years. So we're going to stop doing what the previous government of David Cameron has been doing. We're going to do instead the following. We're going to support a negotiated settlement, a political solution to the crisis in Syria, the framework of which already exists and was drawn up by the respected former head of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, more than a year and a half ago, after he was summarily sacked by Britain and America for having done so. He brought forward a framework called Geneva I. Geneva I was a framework of a negotiated settlement, a political route to a negotiated settlement, to a transition to democracy in Syria. This was sabotaged by Britain and America, which thought that it could bring down the Assad regime on the battlefield. That has failed, and 100,000 people are now dead as a result. We're going to refloat Geneva II under the joint chairmanship of the United States and Russia. And we're going to force the belligerents to sit there until they've reached a solution. And neither side is going to receive another bomb, another bullet, another gun, or another dollar in aid of any kind until they have settled their accounts in Geneva and agreed a way forward for a transition to democracy in Syria.
And how would you, George, visualise this? This gives the listeners a very good landscape, this concept I'm coming at you with, I feel. How would you then, George, I'm intrigued to know, if the red phone's ringing, the President's on the other end saying, Prime Minister Galloway, our Navy is in the Syrian waters, this, that and the other, what would you advise the President? What would you say to him in that scenario?
I'd say that such an action would be absolutely illegal, that Britain, their closest ally, so close there was almost a Lewinsky-like closeness over the last decade or more, will come to an end if you commit this crime. And we will seek to prosecute you in the international criminal courts, which you have not signed up to, but which nonetheless will be invited by us to take a judgment on the illegal act that you're proposing to take. It does not have the support of the United Nations. The United Nations is the arbiter of international law, not any one government or two or three governments within the international community. And we're going to support a peace process, a negotiated settlement to this crisis.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. You've given your thoughts very clearly there, George, and it makes a lot of sense. You think then the consequences of hitting Syria's infrastructure with cruise missiles, etc., etc. What do you think? How will the gameplay alter in that country if America and, let us say, Britain go ahead with that? And the second question: do you think that Mr. Cameron, our Prime Minister, is capable of betraying the democratic process and finding some way, some very little dodgy loophole so he can get involved in the conflict?
On the latter point, I doubt that.
Right.
Although the mass media are doing everything that they can to push us into that position. Yes. The BBC and Sky are daily and all day dilating on whether or not the vote of the House of Commons can be reversed. Mm-hmm. But it will not be reversed. If Cameron were to bring it back, he would suffer an even more humiliating defeat, because the British Parliament, so close to an election, can hear the views of the great majority, 89% in fact, in the last poll in the Daily Telegraph, which I saw, are against it. And the British politicians will not go quietly into that good night. The shadow of Iraq and what happened to Tony Blair is too long and too great for that to happen. But on the first point, I must tell you that any American attack on Syria will quickly become a regional war. The first consequence will be that Syria and its allies will launch a military assault against Israel. Israel will undoubtedly retaliate. And then we will have a regional war between the Arabs and the Israelis, and possibly the Iranians and the Israelis, all setting fire to the most combustible place on the earth, where so much of the world's energy resources are deposited. the Straits of Hormuz will be on fire. No oil will move out of the Gulf. Oil and gas fields in the dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, our best friends, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and so on, will all be on fire. There will be a cataclysm which will reverberate around the world, and it will not be confined to that region either, because terrorism will spread across the world like wildfire. So be afraid, be very afraid of what the consequences will be if Barack Obama launches this war in the next few days or weeks.
Well, why do you think, George, you strike me as a man of peace, why do you think there is such an agenda going on? Are you guided by religious faith, and do you think there is a battle between good and evil? Or what drives you, George, religiously to... Do you think there is a battle between good and evil, and it's religious proportions?
No, I don't think in such Manichaean terms. In fact, it troubles me greatly that there are tens of millions of people, particularly in the United States, religious fanatics, who want to bring about Armageddon, who want this to be the end of times, who believe that Jesus will come back if only we can fight Armageddon. Armageddon is a town in what is now called Israel, by the way. And they hope that on these holy lands, some kind of cataclysm leading to a rapture and the return of the Messiah can occur. I just think that this kind of thinking is doomed to lead humanity to destruction. I don't believe in good versus evil. There are evil people on all sides. I'm not a supporter of the regime in Syria. I've already told you that I want to see a transition to democracy in Syria, negotiated at Geneva under joint superpower chairmanship. So this is not good versus evil. But I promise you that evil will prevail in that region and around the world if we are plunged into this disaster by a United States President, Barack Obama, who was elected to bring these wars to an end, not to begin new ones.
Do you think he's manipulated? Do you think the British Prime Minister and the US President are manipulated by what we would say military-industrial complex issues or lobbying? Raytheon, for example, their shares are going through the roof, George. They're doing very well.
I wish I could say that I believe that.
Right.
But I'm afraid the truth is more prosaic.
Yes.
This is down to the politicians. Nobody can manipulate President Barack Obama. He doesn't have to face re-election ever again in his life. He's in his second term. He defeated John McCain by a landslide victory, only to hand over to John McCain the conduct of US foreign policy in the Middle East. It beggars belief, but no one is manipulating him. He's entirely responsible for his own actions. No, this is about protecting Israel, yes. It's about controlling the Middle East and its energy resources, yes. But above all, it's about projecting American power to show any upcoming members of the BRICS, Russia, and China in particular, that America remains top dog and that no competition for that position will be tolerated. And I think that we in Britain and the rest of the world should not pay the price of American hegemony in the world. We need to bring about an end to single superpower rule in the world. We need multipolarity in the world, with lots of powerful countries and blocs in the world. We were safer when we had that. We've been unsafe ever since we ceased to have it 20 or more years ago.
You refer, George, a fascinating remark, you refer to Syria as the last castle of Arab dignity. Could you tell the listeners more about that remark that I read you were quoted as saying?
It's the real reason that the Western countries hate the Assad regime in Syria. It's not because it's a dictatorship. We love dictatorship in the Middle East. All of our best friends are dictatorships. As a matter of fact, almost every country in the Middle East is a dictatorship. It's not because it's one family rule. We love one family rule. Al Saud has even called its country after the name of its one family rule. In the government of Kuwait, all 27 members of the government have the same family name, Al-Sabah. It's a family business, like all of these friends of ours in the Arab world. So it's not for any of these reasons. It's because the Assad regime maintains a position of belligerence and war against Israel. It refuses to accept that Israel, which has occupied a part of Syria since 1967, imagine, a decade after decade, part of Syria has been illegally occupied by Israel. And Syria and its regime has never accepted it, has never signed a surrender peace deal with Israel in the way that other Arab countries have done. It's because Assad will not sever his relations with either the Palestinian resistance or the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, which gave Israel its only ever defeat on the battlefield in an Arab-Israeli conflagration. And because, perhaps this is the most important one of all, because Assad will not sever his relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And to a very large extent, this is a proxy confrontation. They are not yet ready to confront Iran, so they are confronting the next best thing, which is an Arab country sympathetic to Iran.
Do you think, George, that the end game is Iran then? Do you think they will attack Iran, or do you now think that Russia and China are now putting the two-fingered salute up to America? Do you think the conflict could escalate with involvement Russia and China in an engagement between America, Russia and China militarily? Do you think that's what it could escalate to?
If it became a war against Iran, definitely.
Yeah.
I think we would then be in World War III. And if that's not enough to keep you awake tonight, I don't know what would.
Absolutely. Tell the listeners, George, this interesting story that I noted about you, where you there's a witless article in the Daily Telegraph about you taking money from an Assad-sponsored TV station. The Daily Telegraph failed to mention, however, that the establishment that you are challenging on this issue offered Assad a knighthood. How do you answer your critics to that article? That what I've read is that you took money from a Syrian-sponsored TV station.
Well, you can say I took money from a TV station in return for presenting TV programs for them. And they only know that in the Daily Telegraph because I've registered it, as I'm required to do, in the House of Commons Register of Members' Interests. I'm a TV presenter and a radio presenter, and I get money for presenting programs. The TV station in question is the fastest growing television station in the Arab world. Al Mayadeen Television has, in 1 year, built an audience of tens, scores of millions of people across the Arab world because it's telling the truth about Syria and about other Arab and Arab else conflicts and issues. It's an outstanding television station. I'm proud to work for it. And of course, I get paid for my work. I was paid to work for TalkSport. I'm paid to work for Al Mayadeen Television. And if the BBC want to offer me a TV program, I'll be pleased to be paid by them for doing so too.
So you're not bothered then, George, about working for the BBC that would be a state broadcaster then? You wouldn't bother you with that?
No, I wouldn't for this reason. And it's the same reason that pertains in Al Mayadeen Television. Nobody tells me what to say. Nobody tells me what to think.
Right.
I say and think what I say and think. Whoever I'm working for. And nobody at Al Mayadeen has ever asked me to say anything or asked me not to say anything. And if the BBC would make me the same offer, I'd be glad to do a program for them.
Gotcha. Interestingly, George, as a member of the public, I just want your thoughts on this. Why do I need to turn to Russia Today or Press TV to see what's going on? Your thoughts on that? As a member of the British public, I have to watch Russia Today and Press TV, which has now been removed by Ofcom, to find out what is really going on in the world. Your thoughts on that issue?
Well, you'll be glad to know I'm shortly, with my wife, going to be starting a weekly program on Russia Today.
Lovely.
Which is, I think, the only credible international news station available on satellites around the world that we have left. And watching RT, and then watching Sky and BBC, is a parallel universe.
It is.
Looking at exactly the same story, exactly the same issues, but from an entirely different standpoint. And I agree with Russia Today's standpoint. I think they're telling the truth, and the BBC and Sky are lying.
Very true indeed. I just find your clarifications of these points fascinating, George. Tell me something for the listeners. I describe you as a bit of a grey man because the media portray you as being an Assad supporter, which I think that's not great. I think that you're a man who perceives the situation well. And in that case, we're looking at it says here there was an article that you flattered Assad's aides in getting aid over to the Palestinian camps there. I'm fascinated by this story. Can you tell the listeners what that was all about and how you managed to do this? I'm fascinated.
Well, I flattered the governments of every country that we drove a very large convoy of aid to the Palestinian people in Gaza who were under siege and bombardment by Israel. And to move a convoy of many vehicles and many people and a great deal of aid requires you to flatter every government, including our own. I had to flatter the chief constables of the Metropolitan Police in Kent and all the way down to the Channel ports. I had to flatter the French authorities, had to flatter the Italian authorities, had to flatter the Greek authorities, the Turkish authorities, the Syrian authorities, the dictatorship of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. I'm ready to flatter any authority to get aid to people who are dying for the want of it in a besieged territory which has been besieged and occupied for 65 or more years by the criminal state of Israel.
It's okay then, George, for Israel to drop phosphorus bombs on Palestinian civilians, but obviously there's another rule for the international community when it comes to what's going on in Syria. Would I get that correct with you?
Yes, and we learned from the Mail on Sunday today, front page splash, that the chemical weapons which we are told Assad has and are told has used, although I don't myself believe that, but has, I have no doubt, were sold to him by British companies. British companies sold Assad the sarin nerve gas that we're now being asked to bomb Syria for the possession of.
Is now a cabinet aware of that, do you think? Would be the Prime Minister, would he be fully aware of this?
Government admitted it on the front page of the Mail on Sunday this very day.
I don't understand how a Prime Minister can stand up in front of his own people, George, and say this is wrong to gas innocent men, women and children, while at the same time the very administration that he serves is flogging chemical components for weapons to Syria.
Well, we've been here before, Tony.
Yeah.
The Iraq inquiry, Arms to Iraq inquiry, so expertly dissected in 40 minutes by the late Robin Cook, proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the Thatcher government was supplying weapons, including weapons which were turned into chemical assault on the Kurdish people, for example, by Saddam Hussein.
They did fuck all with that, George, didn't they? That Bush did nothing when the Kurdish people was gassed. The hypocrisy is staggering.
In fact, the British and American government, for many months after that crime, when I was demonstrating outside the Iraqi embassy about it, were still maintaining that it was Iran that had carried out this attack rather than Iraq. Because we were on the side of Saddam Hussein then, because he was against Iran. Now we've destroyed the Saddam government with the cost of 1 million dead Iraqis, 3 million exiled Iraqis, Iraq broken into 100 pieces, each one of them governed by a sectarian militia, thousands dying every month, still 10 years after the war, getting on for 11 years. That's been a great success, hasn't it? We are guilty as a country, and with our main ally, the United States, of sowing murder and mayhem around the world, all the while lecturing the world about morality and justice and law. You really could not make this up.
It's insane, George, as you have rightly said. It's absolutely insane. And the listeners would probably be interested, if you don't mind telling us, about the latest project that you're involved in to do with a Tony Blair documentary. Would you mind telling the listeners about that? Plug it away, kid.
I'd love to, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm making a documentary film called The Killing of Tony Blair. It does not, of course, involve the killing of Tony Blair, but deals with the killing done by Tony Blair and the killing being made by Tony Blair. The killing of the Labour Party as we knew it in the days of New Labour that Blair led. The killing of the million Iraqis I talked about, an uncountable number of Afghans, the killing of Syrians and Lebanese and Palestinians, all the while that he was Prime Minister and now, unbelievably, the so-called peace envoy in the Middle East, a peace envoy going around the area, stirring up as many wars as he possibly can, supporting brute dictatorships when they put down their people who ask only for democracy. Mr. Blair has made a killing out of both. He is currently earning almost £25 million per year. There is no corporation, no dictatorship that he will not take money from. And I'm talking serious money, £25 million a year. And it continues to this very day. On this day, he signed 2 new contracts with the governments of Vietnam and Peru. He's already a sovereign wealth advisor to various dictatorships around the world, and he is involved in business in the very places that he's supposed to be the Middle East peace envoy in. So the taxpayer is paying him to be the Middle East peace envoy and paying for his entourage and his protection at his many houses around this country and elsewhere, whilst he piles up the money and piles up the clutch of houses that he has. And I think we've got to stop this man. I think we've got to put this man on trial and, if possible, in jail. And this documentary aims to do that. So if you want to follow it, you can go to The Blair Doc on Facebook. You can follow it on Twitter at The Blair Doc. Or you can go to Kickstarter.com, look for the killing of Tony Blair, and give anything, £1, £5. £5 gets your name forever in the credits at the end of the movie. And larger donations get you various other perks in relation to the making of this film. Think Fahrenheit 9/11, the marvelous Michael Moore movie which did for George W. Bush's reputation. What Michael Moore did to George W. Bush, I aim to do to Tony Blair.
Right. Okay, George. That's and that can be on Kickstarter, listeners. If you check that out, it is on Kickstarter. It's absolutely fascinating. George Galloway, MP. Thank you very much indeed. Could you just? I could talk for hours to you, George, but could you tell the listeners, if they're interested, a bit more about your Respect Party, please?
Well, the Respect Party came out of the anti-war movement in 2003-04. When we, in our millions, marched against the war and were ignored by the mainstream political parties. I had been a Labour member for 36 years. I had been a Labour MP for 17 or 18 years. I was kicked out by Tony Blair from the Labour Party because of my role as one of the leaders of the anti-war movement. We set up Respect. I have defeated New Labour in 2 election campaigns, most recently in Bradford, where I gained 58% of the vote, therefore more than all the other parties put together. I absolutely destroyed a rock-solid Labour majority, and we are looking for members and councillors and parliamentary candidates all over this country. So if you're interested in that, go to our website, respectparty.org. That's www.respectparty.org. If you can play a part in changing politics in Britain for the better, we want to hear from you.
Thank you very much, George, for all your time. George Galloway, MP, thank you. This has been the Tony Topping Show on Planet X.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups, this is Planet X.
Taking you beyond the frontiers of high strangeness. At St Anne's-on-Sea, at the Community Centre, St Albans Road, on the 21st of September 2013, a psychic remote viewing workshop. By popular request, a one-day course on psychic remote viewing based on the techniques of the spy agencies of the Cold War is presented for you. Participants conduct an actual target session and deeply explore the techniques pioneered by the major players in remote viewing. The day includes looking at that rare information pioneered by Russian remote viewers in understanding the cosmos. Tony Topping has nearly 30 years of knowledge in dealing with UFOs and psychic espionage. He has appeared for major broadcasters from ITV to Channel 5 News. And adding further fascination to events, our special guest will be taking attendees into the fascinating world of the human aura and first steps into stereo viewing, which peers into the spiritual realm of the self using photographic technology. All attendees will receive a CD-ROM of information packed with documents on remote viewing and aura research. It's unbeatable value at a cost of £30, including refreshments. Concessions for low incomes are available. Just email Tony, opsufo@hotmail.com. Tickets are available from psychicrvevent.eventbrite.co.uk. That is psychicrvevent.eventbrite, the word bright, spelt BRITE.co.uk. Come and join us for a fantastic day. This is Breaking the Matrix. I am Tony Topping.
This is Planet X. Planet X.
After Planet X Live on Sundays, 10 p.m, my new show, Breaking the Matrix, covering all subjects that the mainstream media are not bothering to look at. On this edition's episode, the fascinating dialogue of the Syrian soldier and the Syrian freedom fighters trying to make peace with each other in the middle of a firefight in a street. It's a show that's not to be missed. It's Breaking the Matrix, 10 p.m. Sunday after